Today, we've got a fascinating explainer that takes us all the way from the staggering heights of global macroeconomic debt right down to the micro-level realities of human happiness and everyday well-being. We aren't just going to be staring at numbers on a spreadsheet today. We're really going to explore how the financial architecture of the whole world directly impacts the quality of life for the people actually living in it.
380%. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the total debt to GDP ratio for Hong Kong. Basically, that means their total borrowing is worth nearly 4 entire years of their total economic output. It's a massive, almost unbelievable figure that begs the question of how economies even function under such immense leverage. Well, we're going to unpack exactly how that happens.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to scale the global debt mountain, break down the three main types of debt, look at the most indebted nations, including exactly where India stands today, and then wrap it all up by connecting this back to wealth, happiness, and well-being. Oh, and of course, the bottom line. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the global debt mountain.
When you look at the sheer scale of the global financial burden as of Q4 2025, it is honestly mind-blowing. We've got multiple nations carrying total debt loads well over 300% of their GDP. Think about that. Their combined borrowing is worth more than 3 whole years of everything their entire economy produces. It's a pretty staggering picture of just how leveraged our modern world has actually become.
Moving right along to Section 2, the three types of debt. Before we start pointing fingers, we need to know who's actually doing all this borrowing, right? First up, we've got sovereign or government debt. This is borrowing by national governments. Historically, governments rely heavily on this to weather back-to-back crises or just periods of pure economic chaos. Think of things like massive COVID-19 stimulus packages or huge defense and industrial investments. Those often lead to running large fiscal deficits, which just piles more weight onto this specific slice of the debt pie. Next, we have corporate debt. This reflects the borrowing habits of the business sector, specifically non-financial corporations. Companies use this cash to fund their day-to-day operations, invest in shiny new tech, or expand their footprint. And right now, with all the economic uncertainty in the air, the rising borrowing costs tied to corporate debt are a massive headache for businesses all over the globe. And finally, household debt. This is the burden carried by everyday folks like us. We're talking about your mortgage, your car loan, your credit card balances. It directly impacts personal finances and, ultimately, dictates consumer spending power. You combine all three of these, government, corporate, and household, and boom, you get the total debt to GDP ratios we're digging into today.
Okay, Section 3, the most indebted nations.
So let's circle back to Hong Kong's world-leading 380% total debt. The really crucial point here is how that debt is actually distributed. You might assume it's the government, but their government debt sits at a pretty slim 67%, and household is at 86%. But look at the corporate side. A staggering 227% of their GDP is tied up entirely in corporate debt. And look, this massive corporate spike isn't an accident. It is structurally driven by their debt-funded real estate market, which is honestly just standard business practice in such a highly developed urbanized region. In fact, real estate and all its related activities make up roughly a quarter of Hong Kong's entire GDP. Their whole economy is essentially built around this high-leverage corporate borrowing. Now let's contrast that with Japan. They sit in second place globally with a total debt of 372%. But unlike Hong Kong, Japan's corporate and household debts are pretty in line with other developed peers. Instead, Japan's massive debt burden is heavily anchored by the government, sitting just shy of 200%. You might be wondering, how on earth did the Japanese government rack up that much debt? Well, this highly unique situation is the direct hangover from their lost decades of economic stagnation. That all started after their asset price bubble completely collapsed back in 1991. To fight off totally sluggish growth, Japanese policymakers went all in on massive quantitative easing. Basically, their central bank aggressively bought government bonds to jumpstart economic activity. Fast forward to today, and the Bank of Japan literally owns about half of that entire national debt. All right, pivoting to Section 4, where India stands today. For all our Econosite viewers analyzing regional strength, let's see how India stacks up against its fellow BRICS nations. Honestly, it sits comfortably right in the middle of the pack. With a total debt of 163% of GDP, India is way less leveraged than China, which is carrying a massive 298% load.
That being said, India's borrowing is still a bit higher than South Africa at 149% and Russia at 127%.
And if we drill down into India's 163% total, it's a relatively balanced, moderate distribution. Government debt takes the biggest slice at 74%, while corporate debt sits at 49%, and household debt is actually quite low at just 39%. This tells us India has a distinctly different economic structure compared to a highly leveraged corporate environment like Hong Kong or a heavily state-subsidized one like Japan.
Moving on to Section 5, Wealth, Happiness, and Well-being.
So far, we've talked a lot about abstract billions in national debt and corporate leverage, but let's ground this economics in human reality for a second. It really begs the question, does earning more money to surface debt and juice GDP actually buy a better life? Does a heavy economic burden naturally equate to lower societal well-being and happiness?
Let's use the United States as an example. They carry a massive 264% total debt ratio. According to researchers at Purdue University, there's actually a satiation point, basically an income level where making more money literally doesn't make you any happier. But here's the catch. The price of that happiness varies wildly depending on your local cost of living. In the US, it costs roughly 60% more to hit peak life satisfaction in New York City, requiring an income of nearly $196,000. Compare that to Cincinnati, where happiness plateaus at about $122,000.
But hey, true societal health is about way more than just pure income. Enter broader metrics like the Women, Peace, and Security, or WPS index. This index tracks 13 different indicators covering inclusion, justice, and security. And what the data shows is that countries with strong public institutions, great educational access, and solid social safety nets, like the Nordic nations, provide the absolute highest quality of life. On the flip side, the bottom of the rankings are dominated by areas trapped in conflict and instability, or financial structures have basically just failed entirely. To put this in perspective, look at the extremes here. Denmark sets the absolute global benchmark for well-being. They have a top score of 0.939, driven by high workforce participation, strong legal protections, and super low rates of violence. On the completely opposite end, Afghanistan ranks 181st, with a score of 0.279. That is less than a third of Denmark's score. It really proves that true wealth isn't just about a high GDP. It is fundamentally measured by the safety, security, and justice a society offers its most vulnerable people. And that brings us to Section 6, the bottom line. We've traveled all the way from astronomical global debt down to localized human happiness. And what you should really take away from this explainer is a sense of balance. Macroeconomic debt, whether it's government, corporate, or household, is a very powerful tool. Nations use it to navigate crises, build massive real estate empires, and stimulate their economies. But the ultimate health of a country, you can't read that on a balance sheet alone. True social resilience means translating that economic activity into actual inclusion, justice, and everyday security for everyday people.